Okay, rolling.
Hello, welcome to The Jungle. I'm your host, Amberly Lobo. Each episode, I'm catching up with a friend and chatting to them about how they navigate this crazy jungle that we call life. It's going to be wild. On today's show, I'm talking to a guy who has won 8 ARIA Awards, 11 WAMIs, had like a billion #1 hits, toured the globe and trashed all the hotel rooms. Of course, it's the one and only Kav Temperley from Eskimo Joe.
Welcome to the jungle with Amberly Lobo. Welcome to the jungle.
Kav Temperley, welcome to the jungle.
Thank you for having me in your amazing recording studio / podcast studio. It's very pretty.
Look, Kav's just saying that, but as background, we're actually in Kav's studio and I brought in a few plants. So now it looks like we're more in Bunnings, and it was definitely a very visual touch for what is an audio channel, but
It actually smells a lot better than this studio usually smells, because it usually smells like a bunch of dudes have been rehearsing for 6 hours straight. So it's definitely a much, it's got a nice floral aroma in here, which is good.
I think it's this nasturtium.
Yeah.
I think it's this nasturtium. It's got a very nice aroma. Do you spend much time in nature?
Probably not as much as I would like. I mean, I spend a lot of time on planes, trains, and automobiles. Actually, not many trains, but most of my life is spent getting on a plane within like a week period, and then going and playing a show or doing something, and then being in a hotel room for a period of that time, and then being back home. As far as spending time in nature goes, I have a small dog, and we walk in the park and on the beach. But I don't know if I don't go on like hikes in nature or anything like that.
Oh, this is probably then like a sensory overload for your body. It's probably like, what is happening?
Well, I live in Australia, so everything is, the jungle is pretty much reclaiming most street corners that you try and walk down anyway. So yeah.
No, well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm obviously such a huge fan, and I thought it'd be cool to start at the beginning because you and I have had very similar starts to our careers in that we both won competitions. In 2009, I won a competition to be a kids' TV host, and in 1997, you won the campus band competition?
Yes. I was already playing music in Perth, but in 1996, myself and Joel, who's like one of the other members of Eskimo Joe, we had another really bad funk metal band called Freud's Pillow. It was our first band, and I think we came like second in the Perth heat for the campus band competition. But at that point in time, Jebediah had won it like a year or two earlier. So it was like, if you wanted to become like world famous in Perth, then
you had to win it.
You had to win the campus band competition. But it also meant you got a plane ticket out of Perth. And that was a really big deal because flights were really, really expensive back then. And to go touring, it was just felt impossible. So most bands just moved to the East Coast. And Jebs were like one of the first bands to make it out of Perth, but then remained a Perth band, which was like a big kind of paradigm shift. So we were like, cool, let's win the campus band competition. And so we didn't win it in 1996, but in 1997, myself and Stuart McLeod had kind of had this like band where we jammed kind of folky Pixies, Beatles songs. And Joel was like, well, I want to be in a band with you where you are the main songwriter. And I was like, you can totally join our band. And then we had this, when we got together, it was like a really obvious chemistry of people. Like it just worked straight away. And we had this one song called Sweater, which was like a kind of novelty, punk rocky kind of song. And we thought, well, look, if we write 4 more of them, we could win the campus band competition. And lo and behold, we did. And part of that was we won a recording package. So we went to a studio in Sydney and recorded an EP, and then a song from that EP, which was Sweater, got picked up by Triple J, and then we just started touring, and that was about 25 years ago. So.
But like it didn't even get just picked up by Triple J. It made it onto the Triple J Hottest 100 that year, which is pretty massive.
It was huge, and I think it's really hard. I mean, I feel like it's a great time in some ways to be a musician because it doesn't matter where you live in the world. Your vision of where you could go is endless. Whereas I think in like the late 90s in Perth, it felt like getting out of Perth was like impossible.
You needed someone to gift you the plane ticket.
Exactly. The idea of buying our own plane tickets was unheard of. So yeah, we thought we'd like sell 500 CDs in the Grosvenor back room in Perth, but yeah, it turned into being something so much bigger than that. And as we kept working, kept building, and we're still doing it like all these years later, which is amazing.
Well, like off the back of Sweater, like I said, it blew up. It was on Triple J Hottest 100. You also booked a bunch of TV gigs off it. And I saw you went on ABC Recovery.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear how your first experience on the ABC was, because when I first went on live TV, it was with the ABC and your gal totally freaked out. I ran away crying.
Oh.
It was so bad. I got overwhelmed by the pressure. But how was Recovery?
Recovery was amazing. And for those who haven't seen it, Recovery was like a really big show in the 90s where it was kind of like an unheard of moment in history because Triple J was coming up and then they had Recovery. And so every time a really big international band would come to Australia or a band made it big in Australia, like your Jebediahs and stuff, they would get to play in Recovery. And so all kids all over the nation were like waking up early in the morning to watch these like rad indie bands play on national television, and that was huge for the scene. Suddenly everyone wanted to go to indie rock and roll shows. So by the time we got there, like we'd put this song out, it had gone on the radio, they'd asked us to do Recovery, and we were like, oh yeah. And we got there, but because we were such noobs, and it was like this is pre-social media and all those things, they got the CD cover and they were like, they opened it up and we'd gotten these like pictures from a knitwear catalog, and we'd put like these three guys in like sweaters, and we'd put like Kav, Joel, and Stu, like our names underneath it. So when we got there was these giant huge big pictures of like saying Kav, Joel, and Stu from the knitwear catalog, and they were like, who are you guys? And we're like, oh, we're Eskimo Joe. And they were like, who are these guys?
Oh,
and they were like,
do you know, it's so funny because I watched the video and I saw those posters in the background and I was like, wow, Kav really like has gotten younger because the guy, like, I think your guy like had a motor or something.
Yeah, they were like middle-aged dudes in sweaters.
That's ABC research department.
Well, we hadn't even done a photo shoot really, so there was no digital way you could digitally just go on and find them on your Instagram or whatever. So they just thought that's who we were, which is classic. And but then of course after that we had that was like our second tour, I think, maybe our first tour, but yeah. It was pretty funny. But I mean, I think coming from, like, to answer your question about the feeling overwhelmed and all the rest of it, I think coming from Perth, like, especially in those years, it felt like a really big country town. I mean, it still kind of does in a lot of ways. And so I felt like I had no armor, I think, when I first got to the East Coast. And I would see all these other bands, and they just seemed to be, like, all over the, just keeping their shit together compared to what we were doing. Like, we were just like completely like wide-eyed, and it was overwhelming. And like dealing with the industry, I don't know how you felt with that, but dealing with the industry, I found that quite overwhelming. I think the performance side of it, I was like, cool, whatever, this is what we do.
Fine.
Yeah.
But it's all the other little things in between that you're just like, how do I navigate this?
Yeah, well, like, like booking agents and record companies and all those people in those days, they just seem so foreign to me. Like, I hadn't encountered any of those people at my local pub or walking down the street, and there was this kind of level of like macho aggression that was still going around. Like, it was still the end of that kind of super male dominated record industry era, and it's still not, I mean, it's better now. It's not that much better, but it's a lot better. But that was that era of kind of 80s, early 90s booking agents. Like, they were like pretty hardcore and really aggressive because there was lots of money being made in those days. So I found that really hard to navigate. I'd meet these people and I'd be like, you seem so foreign to me. Like, I don't even know how to communicate with you,
Well, the band was doing really well. So this is like OG Eskimo Joe. Eskimo Joe's still there.
Yeah.
And so to summarize, you guys had won this competition. You'd released an EP. The EP had blown up. The EP made it to Triple J's Hottest 100. And then in a total plot twist, you decided to completely change the look of the band. Like, how did that decision come about?
Well, the first EP, with the Sweater EP, which we got our first kind of bit of momentum from, like we were like, cool, this is amazing. We're getting touring. Let's take advantage of this. Feels unheard of, coming from Perth. So then we did a second EP where we begged, borrowed, and stole, the money that we could use to record. And we recorded with this guy called Lindsay Gravina, who was recording all the big bands at the time, like The Living End and a whole bunch of bands. Anyway, he was like the guy, and we managed to get in with him and record an EP. And then off the back of that EP, we got signed to a record label called Modular. But I think they were expecting we'd go off and make like a punk rock kind of 3-chord, easy, recorded in 2 weeks kind of number. But really, that wasn't the music we listened to. And so there was this moment where we had this, like me and Stu were sitting on the back porch of my house, and we basically had been writing like novelty songs, and we were trying to write a song, you know, a punk rock song to the melody of Teddy Bear's Picnic. And Joel came out, was just like, this is terrible. What are we doing? And we had this kind of like, round table, conversation. And the thing is, like, Eskimo Joe first started because I was in this other band, and I didn't really like the music. I wanted to write this, like, music from the heart. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to write music that I wanted to listen to, basically. And then somehow, this novelty thing had run away from us again. Yeah. And it was time for us to make a record. And we just decided that the songs, like the kind of really personal songs that I was writing, that I was going to do something else with again, would become Eskimo Joe, and we would kind of do this shift, and we'd try and make a record that we would actually want to listen to. And we'd already done years and years of touring off these, well, not years and years, we had done 2 years of touring off these 2 EPs that we'd put out. And so driving around in a car for long periods of time, you end up, this is like pre, iPods and smartphones. So you'd have like a couple of CDs that you would listen to in the car, and we'd all decided on like Supergrass and Blur and the Beatles, and like they just kind of went round and round. So everyone's tastes had kind of come in together. So we had an idea of what kind of record we wanted to make, and I guess at that point in time we could have turned around and changed our name and become a brand new band, but we thought, oh, we'll just keep the name and keep doing what we're doing. But that really released us from this kind of the shackles of the novelty band, and it meant that we could sit down and write records that we were proud of and that we actually wanted to listen to ourselves. So that kind of fed into us making our first album, which was an album called Girl. And it was an album of like really heartfelt songs about real stuff that was going on for us, and we tried to be innovative with our production and all the rest of it, and we came out with an album that we were really proud of.
Life is a jungle.
Transition and change is hard at the best of times, but it's kind of a little bit easy when something is sucking. Like if something's doing bad, you can kind of be like, all right, let's maybe change this, guys. But you were doing really good. Like Eskimo Joe with Sweater, like I said, it was on Triple J's Hottest 100. So like to change it then was pretty bold. Like were you at all like, oh God, what if we change it and no one likes the new set? Like, was it hard making that decision?
I think whenever you have people react like dramatically to whatever you do, then I think you're doing the right thing. So like if you fast forward to, because that was the beginning of us allowing us to make our second album of Song as a City, and then Black Fingernails Red Wine, which became this massive crossover album for us. I remember when they played Black Fingernails Red Wine on Triple J's, like, the Richard Kingsmill had this show where he'd play all the new music that had just come out, and I think it was like Hit or Shit it was called, and people were allowed to text in and say whether they thought it was going to be a hit or shit. And the extreme reactions when we played Black Fingernails Red Wine was like, my favorite one was like a bold move but a shit one. No! And I remember at that point in time just thinking we've done the right thing. Like if people aren't
polarizing,
if they're polarized by it, then I feel like we're on the right track, and we were, and that thing just blew up massively. Yeah.
Well, like from that first album, Girl, you kind of blew up. Like Girl, it got certified gold, and you won your first ARIA off it.
Yes.
How was that from your first album?
It was good. I mean, the ARIAs in those days, I think the ARIAs are like a different beast now because they're the Australian Recording Industry Awards, and I think it's always awesome when the ARIAs come along. I get excited. I always pay attention to every band that's nominated. But it was a really different thing then because records were selling. Like records don't really sell anymore. So to have a Recording Industry Award is a weird thing. I think it's awesome that it still happens. But I just want to kind of frame it in the way that like in those years, it was a really, really big deal. Like it was televised nationally. You would go to this big kind of like MTV style awards ceremony. The first album, we won an ARIA. I think it was like for best video clip, which we filmed in Fremantle, which was cool. So that wasn't, to be fair, that was kind of like someone else made the video clip. We were in the video clip.
Win's a win.
Win's a win. But that was cool. But it definitely made us feel like we'd arrived, you know, like we kind of were like, cool, we're finally here. We're not just like the shit kickers. We're actually like, we're doing it proper. And I remember still feeling like I was on the outer in those ARIAs. Like we weren't quite part of the industry. We were like the little kids kind of hanging around. So it wasn't really until we made our album, A Song as a City, that I felt like we like in a mature way had kind of really become part of the Australian music scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What were some of those milestone moments or pinch me moments when you're like, okay, I think we've made it? Like, were there any bizarre things?
There's always like, you know, you climb to the top of one mountain and then see another mountain in front of you moments. But I remember like one of the first ones was obviously hearing Sweater on the radio. Like the idea of a band from Perth getting played on the radio seemed absolutely unattainable. And I think me and Joel were like our only talking about it going, we just want to be driving in a car with a girl and it just be like, just have got some McDonald's or something, you know, whatever you're doing.
Big goals.
Yeah, that's right. And then it comes on the radio and we're like, and be like, you know, just,
that's us.
yeah, just be cool about it. So there was that moment. I think we managed to do that.
You managed to tee the girl up in the McDonald's? Or
well, no, to be fair, I didn't actually get my license until after Girl came out. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, so maybe she was driving me. Yeah, that was a huge moment. And then I guess with our first album, Girl, there was some songs on that like Liar. You know, that was some big pinch me moments. We went into like a really nice big recording studio with a proper producer and did that whole thing. That was a pinch me moment. You know, those songs getting played on the radio and getting that proper support, you know, was a pinch me moment. And then some songs like Nova was a brand new radio station at the time. And Nova now is quite a commercial beast. Like you go there if you want to listen to like full on pop music. But when Nova came out, it was like halfway between what Triple J was and what commercial radio was. So we started to get some songs played on Nova with our first record. And that was a real moment.
What about that one moment where you went on the kids show and met that host with you?
Well, that was
absolute dog. That should have been number one. Were we counting?
That was my number one pinch me moment. But that was
because I was like the dog.
But I mean, that was like fast forward a few years
That
was when we were doing. So when we first met,
yeah, we go back.
Yeah, doing the ABC Kids thing we were doing Basement Birds, and Basement Birds was a record I did with Kevin Mitchell from Jebs, Josh Pike, and another friend of mine, Steve Parkin, and we'd kind of put this super group together. And so we put that record out. We recorded it, wrote it, recorded it, and toured it in like an 8-month period. And part of that was came
on ABC3.
That's right.
Met the big dog.
Oh yeah.
Met the big dog.
Yeah.
No, well, honestly, so after we released Girl, it seemed like you kind of got this success momentum. All your albums started debuting at number one. You had all your singles debuting at number one. Did that success ever at all become like a bit of a weight? Like, because what year did Black Fingernails Red Wine come out?
That was 2006.
So that one came out number one. Then it was on the charts for a record amount of time. Did you ever sit there and go, oh God, this is cool, but how do we do better than this? Like,
I think when you're in the middle of it, you're not over analyzing that part of it. You're thinking about the next thing you're going to do all the time. But by the time, because we had done an album called A Song Is a City, and we'd been through quite a journey with that album, like, you know, creatively and professionally, and ended up in this really great place where we'd ended up on a record label we wanted to be on, you know, with people we wanted to work with, and an album we were super duper proud of. So by the time we got to Black Fingernails, we just took the move to produce it ourselves and kind of book the studio time ourselves. We got an engineer. We were completely in control of the whole process. And, you know, it was even like one of those moments where our record contract had come up. So we were renegotiating a record contract while, you know, Black Fingernails was the number one song, you know, in Australia. So it was just a really one of those when the stars aligned kind of moments. And again, creatively, we were all pulling in the same direction. I think we'd had all of the fights that we needed to have about, you know, drum sounds and this and, you know, creative fights that you have in bands leading up to Black Fingernails. We all knew exactly what record we wanted to make. So it was quite a harmonious moment. So when it went to number one, we're like, of course it's gone to number one. Yes, you know, all those things. But then we're just thinking about the next job we have to do. But again, I think our saving grace through all of that was living in Fremantle. So we would do these tours. We would buy Black Fingernails Red Wine and A Song Is a City. We were starting to tour internationally as well. But we would always come back to Fremantle where there would be like zero industry and just the friends that we grew up with. So we would, I feel like the fundamentals always apply whenever you're doing anything creatively, which is like, what are you doing? Okay, well, you're trying to write great songs and tell stories. How do you do that? Well, you live a relatively normal life and you tell the stories about that relatively normal life. So A Song as a City was all about being in Fremantle in our 20s and the stories of what was going on between our friends and lovers and all that kind of stuff. And then Black Fingernails was kind of an extension of that. You know, we were starting to look out from Fremantle a bit more, but we're still just telling stories, really. And because we weren't living in the middle of like a Sydney or a Melbourne where there was this big hype machine around us where people were going, well, what are you going to do next? You know, are you feeling the pressure? Like no one was asking us that in Fremantle. Everyone was just like, you know, oh, where'd you get those jeans? You know, that was about the extent of the complexity of our conversations. But there was no industry. So we just, you know, we would...
Gave you that space.
Yeah, and you know, real estate was relatively cheap at the time, so you could rent a house in Fremantle with a jam room out the back, and you know, we just focused on the fundamentals of trying to write and create really good music, and then we'd go out and tour that music, and we'd kind of be on this 2-year cycle of writing, recording, releasing, and touring, and then that went on, you know, up until about 2012, until we decided at that point in time that we wanted to go off and do some other bits and pieces.
Life is a jungle.
You touched on it briefly with Black Fingernails Red Wine, but I'd love to hear about like how it feels when you've been like working on something for ages, pouring your love and your time into this thing, and then you release it, and there's this gap between releasing it and waiting to see if people like it. Like, is that, as an artist, are you kind of like, whatever, this is my thing, like it or love it? Or is it like really nerve-wracking being like, okay, we've spent like a year on this, like...
Well, I think being in a band is really helpful. Like I only know this now because I've done a bunch of solo records, and it can be quite a lonely process if you're the only person kind of writing and recording that, then you're putting it out and you're like, oh God, how's this going to go? But when you're in a band...
You can blame people and be
it's quite
that
the
was
opposite.
Joel's fault.
Well, no, we always say we're never going to do this, but so once you've made the record, you do this thing called mastering, which is basically where, you know, everything's mixed, it's all as good as it's going to be, and they basically send it to someone that just gets the stereo tracks and makes them really loud, and so they pop out of your radio. That's mastering. So you get the mastering back, and then you'll go to the, you know, a car or whatever and listen to it together to see how the master sounds on different stereos to make sure it's ready to go. And then we always say that we're never going to do this, but we always have this moment when we've completed a record and it's just the three of us in the car, and we play it through and we all go, we're geniuses. This is amazing. I mean, this is amazing. We're actually geniuses. and so at that point in time, we're so in love with what we've done that there's no doubt in our mind that everybody else is going to love it. But I think, like, as stupid as that sounds, like,
you need it. You need to be delusionally like.
Well, you have
like,
to love what you do. Otherwise, you know, and if you love it, then chances are someone else is going to love it as well. And I think whatever creative project you're working on, you should love it. And if you don't, then people can smell it. It gets stinky, you know.
Have you ever like made a song? I don't know. Like, I would love for Answer to be like Black Fingernails Red Wine, where you're kind of like, this is just some B-side content, and then it's just blown up. Have you ever had one of those?
A little bit, yeah. So when we were writing the album A Song as a City, we'd already been through a process in Girl where we'd worked with this guy Ed Buller, and he was an amazing. This is our first record. He was an amazing songwriter and taught us a lot of tricks about how to write a great song and about the craft. And it felt really brutal at the time. Like, we'd be playing a song and he'd be like, "You're bored. I mean, I'm bored. You're boring me." You know, and like we'd be like, "What?" What he'd be referring to is that, like, good songwriting should really be about keeping the listener's interest, right? So some of the tricks are you go to the chorus on the minute mark, because by that stage, you know, people are getting bored. They need to, and you know, if anything else is self-indulgent, and really, you know, you can be self-indulgent on an album. You can write 10-minute album tracks, but you need singles to sell an album. And that doesn't mean that the singles aren't not the worst or the best songs on the record. They're just like, you know, they're earworms. They get in there and they keep your attention, and you want to listen to it again and again. So we'd already had the experience of thinking we'd made a good record. And, like, for instance, on a Friday, Ed Buller, who's an English guy, he went out for a record company lunch, and he gets back on the Friday afternoon. We're like, "How did it go?" Thinking that he's going to say, "Oh, you guys are geniuses. You know, you're geniuses. They love the record." But he comes back and he goes, "Oh, if you don't write 2 more singles, they're not going to release the album. We're like, what? And we're like, when do we have to do that by? And he's like, Monday morning. And then he leaves for the weekend. And so we were like, oh, crap. So we like had to spend all weekend, and we did it. We wrote 2 songs that weekend. One of them was a song called Planet Earth, another song called Who Sold Her Out. And, the album was saved. We got to put the album out. We had 2 more singles. So by the time we made A Song as a City, we were quite aware that, once we got to that 3/4 mark and we thought that the album was pretty much finished, we then had to look at it objectively and going, do we need another single? And we were like, yeah, we do. And then we were like, well, what are we going to do? I'm like, oh, what's that? Because our friend Andy, who's gone and become a very well-known record producer, he was like our friend who was playing in another band, but also like would help us with all the recording process in this kind of back shed that we had in Fremantle. I'd given him a song that I didn't think we needed because we're such geniuses. We had the album.
This one,
I was like, whatever. And we kind of got to the 3/4 mark and we were like, well, we need another single. And I was like, oh, I've got this other song. And I played it and everyone was like, this is a great song. Yeah. And that song was From the Sea.
Oh my God, that's like my favorite. That's my favorite song.
And so that's
that song. Give that to Andy.
Yeah, and I had to go to Andy and go, oh, sorry, can I have that song back? And he was like, oh
my gosh,
and he was so upset. But that song almost didn't make it on the record. And if that song hadn't made it onto the record,
you would have lost a fan.
Well, we wouldn't.
Seriously,
the
you
album,
would have lost me.
The album would not have been the album that. And From the Sea is like.
Oh, it's my favorite.
It's probably like if you boil down, any song to go, what's the most Eskimo Joe song? That song has all the elements of it. It's kind of got this like Police, meets the Pixies with the bit of Beatles in there kind of vibe.
I love it so much. And the music video as well. I'm probably like the person who's contributed to the most views.
Yes.
Like fangirling hard on it. I'm just like, if you guys haven't checked it out, you got to check it out. It's so good. I can't believe that.
So yeah, it almost didn't make it. And that one song sold the whole entire album.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I mean, obviously you've had so much success. How many ARIAs did you go with at the end there?
8 ARIAs, I think, yeah.
But I guess that's one way to look at success. But what is your definition of like the most successful moment in your career? Like what was the moment where you were like, this is awesome. This is the best thing that has ever happened to us.
It's really hard to kind of put it down to one moment. But I think, the benefit of hindsight is really where it's about. And I feel like my definition, obviously there was moments of success like getting number 1 and, getting your first gold record or first platinum or first like quadruple platinum or first ARIAs, like those kind of accolades. I don't think I really appreciated them at the time. I was like, yeah, cool. Anyway, moving on. I didn't like in my studio now. I'm hanging up a bunch of my gold records, but I kept giving them away when I got them because I was kind of almost embarrassed. I was like, oh, I don't need this to define because this defines this moment in time, and I'm going to be better than that. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I was always thinking about how I could competitively be better than what I've just done. But I think when I boil down success now, I think about the fact that myself, Stu and Joel in Eskimo Joe have managed to keep a friendship and a creative connection for a really long time. And I think that is a huge achievement. And the fact that we can, like we go out every weekend and we play shows and we love it and we have a really good time. And yes, the reason why these people rock up is because we had, ARIAs and platinum records and all the rest of it. But really, I feel like success is the fact that we've made it through all of these little trials and tests and had moments where we didn't ever want to speak to each other because we had spent so much time with each other, but we've made it through that. And now we genuinely like laugh with each other and we get on stage and it's just a joy because for me, that is success. We've successfully made it through all the trials and tribulations of a bunch of people going through some really full-on stuff because, there was moments where the band were super on, the tip of everyone's tongue. So you'd walk down the road and people would yell out from cars, Eskies.
That was me.
Yeah. You're like, she looks familiar.
Can you use
yeah.
Life is a jungle.
Listened to an interview with Stuart Copeland and he was saying creative differences in their band was what in the end caused a lot of friction. So what do you think the key to keeping that you guys together was, or was it having the breaks and coming back together? And
well, I think unlike the Police, they obviously they got an element of fame that we would never know, but Their differences were a lot about songwriting, and from the very beginning, we've always had a thing that it's about writing the best possible song. And traditionally in our band, I do write the songs, if you wanted to put it really like that, but that doesn't mean to say that when it's finished, it's not an Eskimo Joe song. Our songs are definitely a sum of its parts, but my job is to bring the initial idea in, and then we workshop that, and it turns into an Eskimo Joe song. So we never go back and go, well, you wrote that bit and I wrote that bit. It's always been from the very beginning that we split everything equally. So every bit of money that comes in, every bit of songwriting, every accolade is split entirely equally. So no one can really complain, and if you do, it's just like, sure, wah, you've got a terrible life. You've just been flown across the world, and, you get to stay in this lovely hotel and play to all these people. Everyone's getting paid the same amount of money, stop whinging. So no one's really allowed to like complain. And I think that it's different to say something like The Police, where Sting wrote all these songs but didn't give anyone else credit in the band for the fact that they contributed to these songs in really important parts of these songs. And that wasn't in those days, people didn't take songwriting as seriously as they do now. Now we realize that it's a really important part of how bands make an income, definitely much more than what record sales do. Like, in the early days with The Police, they would have just been thinking about live shows and selling records, but now we look at, well, every time a song gets played on the radio, they have to pay the writers of that song. And if everyone in the band's getting an equal amount of that song, then it's going to be a harmonious situation. No one's going to complain.
Well, seeing as you've penned so many number one songs, I would like to dive into the Kav Temperley creative process.
Okay, all right.
So, what is your writing process? How do you write a song?
I'm a big believer in the subconscious. So I think that all of the things that happen in our life, from the phrases that people say as you're walking down the street, like "that's dope" or whatever whatever the kids are saying these days.
My shirt.
Yeah. So that, to whatever's happening on the news, to whatever songs you're listening to what the zeitgeist is. All of those things are in this big soup pot in the back of your brain called the subconscious. And I think when we tap into that is where we get the gold. So I try and do, I feel like I kind of just do it now, but for a long time my discipline was a thing I like to call automatic writing, where I just kind of write a page, and I wouldn't go past one page. When I get to the end of that page, I'd go back and read what I've written and kind of do a power edit of what I've done. And I generally focus on the senses, what do I see, what do I smell, what do I taste? And that way you kind of get these little mini storylines of things that have happened in the last 24 hours of your life. And that might not be the song, but that's something to start with, right? So you get these kind of moments, these essences of things. And then craft comes in, and you just start to kind of go, well, what kind of, what songs have I been listening to? What's influenced? What kind of song do I want to write today? And so all of these things kind of go in. And like I said, I've been lucky enough to work with some really great producers over the years. So Ed Buller, who we did our first record with, taught us a lot about putting a song together. Worked with another guy called Gil Norton when we did our fourth record, who had recorded the Pixies and Foo Fighters and all these bands. And, he taught us a lot about dynamics. So you learn from all these people. So you kind of have this initial idea of this is my subconscious, blah. Yeah. And then slowly over the years, you kind of have these ways of crafting these things in a much more systematic way, I guess.
So just to get a bit more specific, so that when you write a page, is that something you would do daily? I'm just going to write a page every day.
I did daily for a really long time, and now I do it, but I'm kind of working in a different way, where I'm sometimes working on my own stuff and sometimes I'm working on other people's stuff. So today, when we finish this podcast, I've got an artist coming in and we'll be working on a song. So I'll just kind of embody all of that stuff, and I don't need to do it as a Dear Diary thing so much anymore. But for a long time, especially through all of the Songs of the City and Black Fingernails and all that time, I would go to every day to a little cafe in Fremantle, and I would just write a really short story, basically. And it wasn't until I discovered a guy called Charles Bukowski, who's a really famous poet and writer.
He's written that book about, is it a seagull book? Is that who I'm thinking of? No.
Possibly, I don't know.
It's a sad book.
Not well. I would definitely call his stuff sad, but no, he's kind of like a gutter poet, and he made poetry more accessible to the everyday man, I guess is a nice way of saying it. He stopped it from being so highfalutin, but no less important and powerful. But he would write these really short stories in his poetry. And when I read that after I was doing, especially during A Song as a City, I was like, oh, I'm on the right track. I can call this writing, I can call this poetry, or I can call it song or whatever. And so that was my technique of how I would get whatever's in my brain onto the page. And then I would take that in and I would start to edit that down.
When you're writing it though on that page, are you writing it, trying to write it as a song, or you're writing it literally as a story?
It's kind of a combination of the two, because generally, like, everyone will have some song stuck in their head, right, as you're walking down the street. And, that's always playing in the background. Or maybe there's 5 songs playing in the background in your head. And so as you're writing, you're kind of like dipping in and out of these different like musical things in your subconscious. And so that's kind of influencing what you're writing as well. But I don't try and focus too much on like it's got a rhyme or it's got a what we call in songwriting scan, where it's got to have this kind of rhythm to it. I just let myself go, and then once I've got that, I'll kind of take that back to the jam room and I'll start to edit that down and play with it and rewrite it again. And sometimes it like just comes out really easily and the whole thing's just like bloop, there it is, and you might write a second verse and there's the song. And then sometimes you got to go over every chord and every melody until you've got it right. And like I said, the craft comes into it as well, because my favorite, like if you look at the lyrical side, my favorite way to do it is like, okay, it starts, here's a moment in time, we are talking about a story at a moment in time, and that's like one phrase, and then the next phrase will be this really kind of esoteric imagery, and then I'll do that again, and I'll try and do those combinations, because for me, I just like that, like I don't want anything to be too literal. I want it to be enough of a mirror that everyone gets their own story back from it as well. And then musically, there's tricks that I always put into it, like, try and go to the chorus by the minute mark.
I've never heard of that. That's probably why I've not got my number one.
Yeah, that's
okay.
right. And then also, your trick with your choruses, you want to keep the listener's interest. So generally try to go to a different chord for your chorus. I mean, it sounds really normal and obvious, but you'd be surprised the amount of people who get a couple of chords and they're like, yeah, this is the chorus. And all they're doing is singing the same melody over the same chords. And it's like, well, it just sounds like your verse. And so, that was one of the brutal lessons that we learned with Ed Buller, where he was just like, no, you have to change this. And it's really hard because you're generally telling stories that are quite emotional and important to you, like you want to get this off your chest, and that's how most songwriters start. Like they have to kind of vanquish the demons, you know what I mean? But so then once you get into the craft of it, you have to be really objective and be like, I know this moment means a lot to me, but I actually need to let this go because it's slowing the song down, and so you have to like kill your darlings, and then you have this editing process till you get something that hopefully translates in a way that is good enough for either Taylor Swift or Metallica to play, and it still sounds like the same song.
Do you write all your songs, like, say, in an album in the one book? Like, do you have little journals?
Yeah, I've got so many journals, and I eventually, I get really sentimentally attached to them, and then, but they pile up, and so I eventually have to, start throwing them out, but even then I'm just like, oh, okay, I'll throw it away. Yeah.
Do you have any tactics for, the blank white page when you get that writer's block? I imagine that must happen. Do you?
Well, again, the automatic writing is a really good thing. I mean, one of, just getting stuff on the page, and then it doesn't have to be the song, but I like to think about it as the rungs of the ladder that get you to the roof, it doesn't have to be the idea. It's just sometimes the hardest thing is just starting. And I think distraction is the biggest thing with starting an idea. You've got to be distracted. And then once you're into it, it just starts to flow, right? But I think titles, if I'm writing with another artist, then starting, and this is a very Sting thing to do, so he would always start with message in a bottle or whatever, and then he'd write backwards from that title. But there's another guy called Desmond Child who wrote all of these super duper hits You Give Love a Bad Name and I Was Made for Loving You, and so many big kind of cheesy rock hits. But his thing is it's got to have this kind of positive negative, you give love a bad name. So it's kind of something positive and then something negative. And so it's got this push-pull straight away. So if you can start with a title like that and it gives you a really great place to just to kind of go back to this is what we're writing about, and it keeps you focused. So if you're writing in a group scenario, that can be a really good way to do it.
Do you use a voice memos? Say you're out and about and you hear
Oh my
someone
God.
shout like dope.
Yeah, dope. So many of my ideas. So I mean, really, like with the automatic writing thing, like again, all you're doing is like a brain dump, right?
Yeah.
So you can do the same thing on voice memos, and I use voice memos to do it all the time. In fact, there was a song when I did my last solo record. There's this little kind of bridging track that I put in because I was listening to it and I was just like, oh, it's because when you put an album together, like albums aren't such a big thing anymore. People put songs out, but I love albums. I love an album that plays through and it feels effortless. Like every song was meant to be written after each other. And sometimes you'll have a moment where two songs don't fit together. So you write a bridging track, which is just like a little 30-second thing that kind of happens between the two songs. And I got to this point on my last record, I was like, oh crap, I need a bridging track. These songs don't work next to each other. So I went through my voice memos to see if I had any songs floating around. And there was this one of me like driving in the car and you can hear the indicator come on and I'm just like, I'm like, blah, 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 and I'm just like dribbling shit into my voice memo. And so I just got that and just put it on there and then like put a little beat behind it.
Number one hit, another ARIA.
Yeah, that's right. And then I got like some, because there was a saxophone solo on the first song, so I got this outtake from the sax thing and put that in there, and then just created this track, and I was like, cool, that'll do. And it's like, it's so funny because it's literally just my voice memo, because I do so many of them. I'm like, every time a melody comes into my head, I just record it straight away.
That's so cool. No, I'm so inspired. Well, I wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk about your journey to success, because I think on the outside, looking at your bio, it can kind of read that you won this competition and then success sort of just effortlessly flowed, like you found this magical path and you strolled down it and you collected 56 ARIAs. Like, I want to know, does a magical path exist, or was it actually a lot of hard work?
Definitely lots of hard work and lots of kind of shittiness in between. But I mean, I think about this all the time because I have other friends who I think are, equally, if not more talented, as writers or singers or whatever. And why did I succeed and they didn't? And it's kind of like a weird combination of this kind of just obsessive have to do it all the time, but also like getting out of the way of yourself is a big part of it. Like so many people get to the final point and then just sabotage everything.
Freak out, right?
Yeah, they have this like, oh, it's all stuffed, and it's like, the 3/4 mark of doing anything, that 80 to 90% mark of doing any creative project is brutally hard. And a lot of people just give up at that point in time. And so you're continuously fighting this like war of attrition with yourself, of like trying to like break through. And then once you do it, it's like you get instant amnesia and forget that there was any hard work involved at all. You're like, that was awesome. Let's do it again.
Easy. Let's do another album.
But
guys.
2 weeks prior to that, you were just like, I forgot how much work was involved. And so I think that like that path to success is like, yes, you need to be like challenging yourself, and like you were talking about before, like growing and changing all the time is really important and scary, because growth is hard. Like no one wants to grow.
The comfort zone is so comfortable.
Yeah, it is. So you have to be breaking out of your comfort zone continuously and reinventing the wheel, but then just breaking through that 3/4 mark all the time, and it's really mostly fairly unromantic, that part of it, I think. So I think the sweet road to success was paved by continuously having to break through that really boring unromantic part of the creative process.
Yeah.
Life is a jungle.
What were some of those big obstacles for you, like along the journey? Were there any standouts where you were like, holy crap, like this is...
Well, I think luckily enough, a lot of the times when it was in the Eskimo Joe world, there would be, because there's three of us, there'd always be one of us going, come on guys, we're almost there, you know what I mean? While when someone would fall down, the other person would step in. And sometimes, that would go well. And sometimes if you were that person who had, was too tired to go on, and you come back to it, you're like, hey, hold on, this thing's run away from me. Like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this, but it was finished and it got put out, and that's why you kept going. So with Eskies, I think we kept making it because we've got three people who love to work really hard at what they do and are picking each other up along the way. Doing solo stuff is like, finding the motivation. I mean, a solo record, yeah, God, I love it. I actually love. I love it. I would seriously, if I had the time, I would jump in and just start doing my next one right this second. But but the reality is that, you know, if you're writing a record by yourself, you know, you're writing the drum part and then you're writing the bass part and then you're writing the piano part, but you've also written the song and then you've got to be the engineer. So you've got to be the person putting the microphones in front of everything. And it just takes a really long time. And that objective process of listening to it going, is this the demo or is this the record? Yeah. And like all of those things, like it's a painful amount of decision making. So both of my solo records I've put out, I've like got the 3/4 mark of those have been painfully hard. I mean, me and my wife Beth just completed this project called Art 6.
It was amazing. I went there.
Which was wicked. And now we're on the other side of it. We're like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Let's do it again. Or should we? But when we were in the 3/4 mark of doing the whole thing, it was really, really full on because there's so much coordination and so much like, you know, unromantic work involved that you just got to break through. So I think those, you know, as far as like a moment in time, it happens with
daily,
every project, hourly, exactly. You just got to break through all the time and never just be like, I'm lazy. It's like you got to continue. It's like the best analogy is that like you just got to keep walking, and you might just have to sit down and have a little rest every once in a while. But then you got to, before your body cools down, you just got to keep on walking. Because as soon as maybe some people take a rest for 10 years and come back to it and be like, I'm ready for it again. But for me personally, I feel like if I stop, then
it ain't happening.
It ain't happening again. Yeah. And so you just got to keep doing it, you know. And if you do that, you'll be prolifically doing it forever.
How important is it to have a vision of, I imagine in this process, you've got a vision of the end product in your dream that's kind of pulling you through it to a degree? Yes,
always. I mean, you have like a vision, but you have to combine that with, you know, your expectations and serendipity, you know, like because things will happen in the process that you have to pay attention to, and you'll be like, well, this is actually possibly the most important thing of this whole process, and I didn't think that that's what I was trying to do, but that's what that's what I've done. I mean, and record making is a really interesting, easy way to talk about it. Like, you'll start with an idea in your head of how you want it to sound, but like fun, experimental, serendipitous things will happen, and you'll be like, wow, I did not expect I was going to arrive at that location. But again, with the Art 6 thing, you know, we started it about the creation process. We were getting, you know, visual artists and musicians together to create this kind of visual musical art. That was what we were trying to do. But where we ended up was this street art event. I mean, at the end of this whole process, we put on this street art festival where we projected these musical animated pieces of art we'd created onto the walls of Fremantle. And it was this amazing community art event. And we were all like, this is amazing. Like, this is possibly the best part of the whole entire thing. And so we were like, and it wasn't even something we planned on doing at the beginning. It just happened serendipitously. And now we're like, well, that's possibly the most important part of it.
For people who maybe are working on a project or they've got this dream that they're chasing, and maybe they're at that 85% place and they're getting all these obstacles thrown at them in whatever they may be. Like, what advice would you give them to keep going? Like, it's almost there. Like, do you have anything that you do?
Well, I mean, there's all those things of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just keep going. Yeah. But it's just this chipping away at like just putting one foot in front of the other. Like, imagine you're in a desert and you've run out of water and you don't know whether you're going to make it back to civilization again. But you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, because just over that next sand dune is probably going to be an oasis. And you'll be fine.
You've imagined this really well in detail.
Yeah. So it's that thing. It's just, you just got to keep going and you will make it. That's all it comes down to. But deadlines are really, really important, you know. So if you're doing an artistic pursuit, you know, you could keep tinkering with that paintbrush forever. Like, eventually you have to call it and put down, you know, that paintbrush and have done everything to the best of your abilities and go, this is finished. I'm going to move on to the next one now. Because if you don't do that, then you'll just be stuck. A lot of people get in this quagmire of never finishing it because they don't feel like it's ever finished. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you can put something out and the things that annoyed you about it and that were imperfect about it will inform what the next thing is and make that one better. And you won't. And, you know, I think Black Fingernails Red Wine is a better album than Girl. But we had to go through that process.
No, he didn't.
But we had to go through that process to get there, you know. Like, we had to, you know, get to the end of an album and be like, that was good, but we should do this next time, you know. So I think deadlines are super duper important at that 85% mark. Set the deadline, even if you have to push the deadline out a tiny bit, still have that deadline, and then it allows you to, move on to the next project.
Well, speaking of deadlines, I could talk and talk for ages, and I still have a billion more questions for Fangirl Emily, but I'm so conscious of your time. So thank you so much, Kav. This has been absolutely amazing. Where can people find you?
Well, if you want to send me a message, then I'm probably most prolific on Instagram, so I'll probably message back. But I'm on Facebook, Kav Temperley at Facebook or whatever it is.
Well, to end, I like to say life is a jungle. So could you leave the listeners with any parting Kav Temperley wisdom?
Holy crap, that is so much pressure. My parting wisdom is that... really, if we're talking about creativity, then set yourself a deadline, get to the end of that deadline. If what you've done sucks, the beautiful thing about creation is you can always create something else.
Dude, that was awesome. That's all we needed.
Mic drop. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe and share it out with your family and friends. Also, let me know what you think. Drop me a message on socials at Amberly Lobo. And for more information on the show, including all the behind-the-scenes pics and videos, head across to amberlylobo.com. That's it. Have an amazing day, whatever you are up to. And remember, life is a jungle. Stay safe.